This is Batman Arkham Shadow. Coming from developer Camoflaj, creators of Iron Man VR, this is a new entry in the famous Arkham series, but designed exclusively for virtual reality. Taking place after Arkham Origins and bridging the gap between Arkham Asylum, this brand new entry in the series sees players investigating the Rat King and his band of cult followers. Guys, this may be one of the most ambitious made for VR titles that I've ever played, and it definitely makes a play for my top 5 best VR games of all time. The quest has finally put on its big boy pants. Stick around and I'll tell you more. Hey guys, it's Chris from the VR Grid and welcome to the channel. If you like this video, give it a like for us, and if you're interested in more VR content from us, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss new videos as they drop. And if you're looking to join our VR conversations, feel free to leave a comment, or even better, join us each and every Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific here for the Virtual Boys podcast. Okay, now, full disclosure, I am a huge Batman fan, so after playing this game for the past 15 hours or so, I've really had to step back and check myself and make sure that I wasn't simply fanboying over the fact that I got to be Batman in all his glory. So I put myself in a timeout, and now I'm ready to tell you my thoughts. Telling an all-original Batman story, Arkham Shadow thankfully takes a less traveled route and tells a story featuring the Rat King and his followers. Here, Batman faces a new conspiracy threatening to tear Gotham apart, and one that takes him from the streets of Gotham to the depths of Blackgate Prison and beyond. I'm keeping it pretty light here and spoiler-free, but suffice it to say, Camoflaj has woven themselves a story worthy of the Arkham franchise. Filled to the brim with Arkham series lore, this tale not only delves into the lesser-known Batman villain, but also gives us a look into Batman himself. Now, this is not the deepest narrative, but what I loved is that the game takes its time with the primary story, sprinkling in some Wayne backstory and really letting characters breathe. This is helped substantially by the top-tier voice talent across the board, featuring the likes of Elijah Wood, Troy Baker, Tara Strong, and Martin Jarvis, the latter of which you may not recognize, but who has voiced the character of Alfred since the series' beginnings. Alfred is in your ear much of the game, and it just feels like coming home. Now, yes, sadly, Kevin Conroy is no longer with us, and his iconic portrayal of Bruce Wayne and Batman is felt here. That being said, newcomer Roger Craig Smith blew me away as Batman and does Conroy proud. And let me just say, this is the guy Warner Bros. And DC need to be using for any projects moving forward.
Where's the Rat King?
Send me to Blackgate.
Answer me!
Welcome to your cave away from caves, sir. My apologies for the limited layout, but I find the Spartan approach suits the locale. And I've done my best to provide some of the comforts of home.
Thanks, Alfred. I'll take a look.
The voice acting here in Arkham Shadow is absolutely brilliant and screams AAA game production, not only in its execution but in the writing as well, which is true to lore, the characters, and the story itself, while also managing a bit of humor from time to time. Now, I'll talk more about the sound side of things in a bit, but I'm just dying to get into the gameplay of Arkham Shadow. Kicking things off, it needs to be said right out of the gate, developer Camoflaj has absolutely succeeded in bringing the Arkham series gameplay into VR. Back in the day on the PSVR, we got Arkham VR, which was a fun teaser of what could be. Developed by the series originators Rocksteady Studios, it was a lavish taste of the Arkham series, but was infuriatingly little more than a tech demo. 8 years later, and we, the VR faithful, have finally gotten the game we always wanted. Now, keep your expectations in check. Don't expect this to be the size or the scope of, say, Arkham City or Knight. Instead, Arkham Shadow looks to fall more in line with the first game in the series, Arkham Asylum, often feeling like a direct sequel that might have come before the series went into the more open city route. In fact, Camoflaj director Ryan Payton was cited as stating that they particularly studied Asylum's pacing, length, and even its enemy AI patterns, and yeah, they nailed it. Starting in the streets of Gotham, players are thrown into the basics of being Batman. Here, I immediately could tell that a lot of care and thought had gone into the movement mechanics. Fluidity of movement is the first thing I noticed. Running, sliding, vaulting, and climbing is all handled with ease. There's no jump button per se, but instead the right analog stick is used here, not only allowing players to duck, but also by being pushed forward, you will automatically vault over objects or across gaps. Furthermore, if dropping from a height, Batman will automatically cushion the fall with a flare of his cape. Gliding is also a thing here and probably my single favorite part of the game. Whether crossing gaps or sailing across the game's larger, more vertical areas, players simply grab the sides of their torso with the trigger and pull their arms out to their sides. This grabs your cape and deploys a glide mechanic that can then be controlled by tilting your arms back and forth, with quicker turns being done by the analog stick or just physically turning. They have nailed this aspect of Batman, and when I was coming down on enemies with my bat shadow casting below me, well, it was one of the greatest video game moments of my life. Now, speaking of movement mechanics that Camoflaj nailed, we have to talk about the combat system. Honestly, I would have thought that the famous Arkham series combat to be impossible to bring into VR, but goddamn have they ever done it. Taking the lock-on punch mechanic from Iron Man VR and building around it, Camoflaj have managed to keep the fluidity of combat with multiple foes at the same time, while simultaneously maintaining the depth and player choice and tactics that the series was made famous for. And they have done this in VR, without it feeling janky or making me feel like I was constantly fighting the controls. Like I said, the key is the lock-on punch mechanic. Looking at any given enemy and then making a fist, you lock onto them. Throwing a punch automatically leaps you forward to engage them. Different distances, though, are handled differently, making this mechanic feel dynamic when in combat. On-screen prompts tell players if they are to jab, swing, uppercut, or slam their opponents, mimicking those button prompts from the flat games. Failing to nail the prompts results in a failed attack and possibly damage to your health. Now, as the game progresses, you learn new combat skills either by progressing the story or by using XP points to unlock them. This, along with new enemy types, and players will be dodging knife attacks, swirling their cape to stun, vaulting over enemies to get at their back, and many other fun combat options, many of which are activated by leveling up the game's combat multiplier and unleashing special attacks like quick takedowns, explosive batarangs, or even a swarm of bats. Combat 101 can be fast and furious in its own right, but throw in 8 more combatants, and Arkham Shadow's combat system really shines. When finding multiple enemies combatants off to your side, don't patiently wait their turn, with incoming attacks being communicated with on-screen prompts, and again, keeping with the flat game, you only have a few seconds to react and counter, or suffer a blow. What I really liked about this combat system is that I was never locked into the on-screen prompts, and could at any time dodge backwards or to the side with a click of the left stick, in order to get some space from the enemies. As I got more comfortable with the combat systems at play, I tended to use this more and more in order to manage large groups of enemies, identifying who I wanted to dispatch first, and most importantly, avoid being dogpiled on. I played this on hard mode and I got my butt kicked many times, but I highly recommend it, as hard difficulty is where the challenge came in. However, what's the point of replicating the Arkham combat system so brilliantly if you don't get to apply it in what the series calls Predator mode? Just like the core series, Arkham Shadow is filled with interesting Predator environments, which are essentially larger, more spacious combat arenas. Filled with places to grapple, glide, and hide in, Predator sections are where players get to really flex all their skills and play with all their gadgets. These areas are often filled with multiple armed enemies and require planning and strategy. This is where my Batman fantasies were the most satisfied, and Camoflaj once again absolutely hits it out of the park here. Like I said previously, the developers studied Asylum's enemy AI behavior, and watching them react to fallen comrades and search for me felt just like the core series. These encounters get harder and larger as the game goes on, so strategy and patience become key. Thankfully, in addition to gleefully being able to grapple down and pick up enemies to hang upside down, you will gain access to many bat gadgets to assist you in your combat endeavors. What I really appreciated here with the game was, again, how well thought out the implementation of bat gadgets was handled. Having to grab all these items on your belt would have been a clusterfuck. Now, admittedly, having the grapple gun as a button press was initially a real disappointment, as I wanted the iconic feeling of reaching out and firing it. However, this was the right choice, as when in the throes of combat and being shot at, a quick drop of a smoke bomb and a fast grapple to safety was fast and easy, and a much better choice than fumbling around my back while being punched in the face. Less combat-based gadgets like the explosive shot and your hacking scanner are holstered on your waist, as is the option to physically grab a smoke bomb from your arm. Additionally, detective vision is activated by a quick trigger pull by your head, so you do have physical control over items. But when in combat, I delighted in not fighting essential controls and having my arms free to fight. And I might add that I found seated play a wonderful and easy experience as a result of some of these design choices. Speaking of seated play, some of you may be worried about all this intense gameplay making you feel sick. Thankfully, the game has many comfort options to help you on your way. However, those new to VR might want to start on something a little slower. Getting away from the combat side of things, players will find a lot to do. This is by no means a small game, and depending on what difficulty you play at and how much time you spend exploring, players will easily spend 10 to 15 to maybe even 20 hours here, and that doesn't include all the optional challenges and predator missions to unlock as you play. It's not all fighting in Arkham Shadow though, and for those that like the more detective side of Batman, you will also be very happy as the game features many investigative points as you try to piece together the mysteries that the story provides. Additionally, the game is filled with collectibles to find, many of which are locked inside puzzles very similar to the Riddler trophies in the core series. It is here where I will say the game doesn't quite deliver on the level of past games though, as the puzzles here just simply lack the creativity and complexity of previous entries, relying too much on similar gags. That being said, I still love their inclusion, and admittedly I wasn't able to solve many of them or miss them altogether. Blackgate Asylum itself, where you will spend much of the game, is laid out in an almost Metroidvania style, with many areas locked behind some type of gadget you need to obtain or a code you don't have. It's a large facility though, with many hidden areas, air ducts, and caves to explore. However, the game does drag at times, requiring a little too much useless back and forthing that sometimes made the game feel a little padded, reusing some combat areas along the way. But thankfully, it keeps this to a minimum, and with enough new areas and a steady flow of gadgets and abilities, it keeps things interesting between the story beats. Now, graphics wise, Batman Arkham Shadow is a showpiece title for the Quest 3, really coming off like a first party AAA offering. On the Virtual Boys podcast, Ryan and I have often been heard saying that we wished a certain game was not stuck on the Quest, as we would have loved to have seen it shine on more powerful hardware. More times than not, huge compromises are made to get games to run on standalone hardware, to the point where we coined the term questy when describing a game's graphics. Batman Arkham Shadow does not look questy in the least, and comes pretty damn close to looking every bit as good as the still impressive Batman Arkham VR I mentioned earlier that hit the PSVR and PC in 2016 and 2017 respectively. Arkham VR was a small-scale game with a primary purpose of wowing people with its visuals, so the fact that a mobile headset has gotten close to that and delivers a full game experience, I'd call that impressive. Within just the first few minutes in the headset, players will have no doubt that they are playing an Arkham series game, as Camoflaj has done an incredible job of replicating the look, feel, and art style of the prior Rocksteady games. Maybe the most impressive engineering feat is how Camoflaj managed to get a game of this texture detail and scale of environments to still have dynamic lighting on the Quest. Everything from the steel pipes reflecting light to your own cast shadow is intact, and it really makes the world feel alive, something most Quest games to date lack. Further adding to the game's visual prowess is the excellent particle effects. Whether it's steam coming out of spinning air ducts, escaping gas, or your own smoke bombs, these are effects we rarely see on mobile hardware. Yes, the game is playing some graphical tricks here and there, and the game can come off a bit soft visually, but despite wanting that bump in resolution or utilizing some super sampling here and there, I never really wished I was playing this game on more powerful hardware. Texture pop-in is extremely rare, and there was no feeling of the game using foveated rendering. There's some detail drop-off when looking at objects in the distance, but it's done so smoothly it almost goes unnoticed. Now, speaking of objects up close, I thought the character models, including Batman himself, were on point. They aren't the best in the series, but they still look fantastic in the headset, and especially when you're face to face with a character. Similarly, character animations, including NPC combatants, look pretty fluid and utilize motion capture techniques as one would expect from a AAA game. Again, they aren't a series high, but definitely didn't hurt my feelings either. For when the game is taken as a whole and looking at the scale, scope, details, and effects all at play here, Batman Arkham Shadow certainly plants a flag in the ground for what is possible now on standalone hardware. Camoflaj was smart to pick a scale of game that they could really deliver. Without trying to do too much, they mostly nail it. I say mostly because at launch, there are a few issues. I'm guessing this is pushing the Quest 3 to its limits, and at times the game does hiccup frame rate wise. This was never game breaking as the game often runs smoothly, but for those more sensitive to VR movement, you may want to head over to the options menu where you will find an option to turn on a variable resolution mode that will adjust the resolution to maintain a locked frame rate. I wanted resolution and didn't mind the odd blip, so I kept it off. Additionally, I did run into what I think is a bit of memory leak, as during some long play sessions, I did notice an increase in frame rate drops along with some audio bugs and some slight tracking issues in combat. Now I'm talking about like after 3 or 4 hours of straight gameplay, and a simple headset reset cleared this up. So it's not really an issue until it inevitably gets fixed, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Now, just to finish up on the sound side of things, outside of the excellent voice acting, the sound of Arkham Shadows is every bit the AAA experience of other titles in the series, and it likely borrows many of the same sound assets. It's a rich sound mix, and it makes nice use of the game's 3D audio. Filling out the sound side of things is a top-tier orchestral soundtrack from composer Kazuma Janucci, who previously did the soundtrack to Iron Man VR. I wouldn't say that the game has any new memorable Bat theme to add to the Batverse, but the music here complements the game very well in creating the feeling of being inside an Arkham game. And finally, that brings me to my final thoughts and review score. I'm a huge Batman fan. I've played all the Arkham games and I'm a VR fanatic, so yes, this game was tailor-made for me. Fanboying aside, there's no doubt about it, Batman Arkham VR is one of the best VR games ever made. Regardless of how you want to say it, this is Quest's Half-Life Alyx, or its GoldenEye if you will. This is a system seller and a game that will hopefully change how flat gamers feel about VR games. Like Half-Life Alyx before it, Arkham Shadow, a sequel to a beloved IP, is slick, polished, deep, and straight up good enough to drive flat gamers crazy that they can't play it unless they get a headset. This is what VR needs more of. The fact that this is running on a Quest 3 is all the more amazing. The VR Grid gives Batman Arkham Shadow a 9.5 out of 10. I'm not saying this is perfect across the board. It has a few performance issues and can suffer from some repetition of areas with a few fetch quests that tried my patience. But as a whole, it was a brilliant Batman adventure that sets a new bar for flat IPs crossing over to VR. And most importantly, it made me feel like I'm Batman.